there are plenty of people that would ask the question right about now during today's society, and I'm covered in chlorine dust because of what I do, but would ask the question of why do Christians spend so much time on Easter? So much time. And what I mean by that is that you have Palm Sunday, and you got the what's actually called Holy Week, capped off, of course, with the Resurrection Sunday. It's technically 8 consecutive days, with each one of these days having a moment of significance, if we want to call it that, something that it emphasizes that Eastern Orthodox, Roman Catholics, a little bit more liturgical Protestant denominations will actually have maybe sunrise or evening meetings every day of the week that are specifically highlighting certain things. Where you have Palm Sunday, of course, is the triumphal entry, and then Holy Monday is usually going to be clearing the temple, and then Holy Wednesday, the curse of the fig tree, and then him healing and attending to and teaching the people. And then Holy Wednesday is usually going to be that really hard discourse that occurs there in the temple where he rebukes the religious leaders and the religious elite and all these groups that are there, of basically just kind of reading them the riot act. Then you have Maundy Thursday is when the show really starts. Maundy, derived from the Latin root from which we get mandate, which is because during the upper room in which Jesus washes the disciples' feet, and then he sits down with them and he goes through the Passover Thursday evening and teaches them a whole bunch of stuff, just like drinking from a fire hose event of all these things, in which a new command I give to you is embedded in there in John's gospel. And that word command, mandate, right, mandi, is in fact, the church that I attend is going to have a special service that evening. A lot of churches have special evenings that evening in which they may even go through the motions of a traditional Jewish Passover ceremony with the 4 different cups of wine and the breaking of the bread and all those things that symbolize certain things from Jewish traditional history, and how those things relate to the ministry of Christ that is being fulfilled, and the law of ancient Jewish culture that is being fulfilled in the ministry of Christ. And so Maundy Thursday, then you have Good Friday is one of the ones that gets a lot of fanfare as well. Of course, that's the crucifixion and betrayal of Jesus in the garden, and him being turned over to the Romans, him being scourged, him carrying his own cross to the point of crucifixion, Simon from Cyrene carrying it the rest of the way. All those things happen on Thursday. Holy Saturday being when he's in the grave. Sunday, resurrection. The women go to the tomb at first light and discover the now vacant tomb that was donated to him by Joseph of Arimathea. All of those things, like, why spend so much time? And in some ways, it might actually become self-evident with the amount of detail I've already provided, of that a lot of things happen in very quick succession. That, in fact, you could highlight a different discourse or event throughout that period. There's stuff like Judas agreeing to betray Jesus is in there that some will highlight, some may not. And the collective debate over who's the greatest, Jesus washing the disciples' feet. Like, there's so many other things that are so really, really important, that are incredibly densely packed amounts of instructive truth and illustrative truth, that you could do an entire sermon series on each one of those things. And that's why, especially some of the really liturgical services, they can go potentially 2 to 5 hours on a regular basis for each one of those evening services. That's why. There's a lot here. It's very densely packed, in the same way that you could dissect the Sermon on the Mount alone over years of continuous study. And you could dissect the upper room discourse in and of itself for years of dedicated study and still find more and more and more of it. And you could dissect the book of Leviticus, the strict ceremonial, moral, civil laws and restrictions that are in the written code of instruction there for years. Or Deuteronomy, the fact that it's the most often repeated and quoted book in the entire both Old and New Testament, with some 190 different references just in the Old Testament, just in the New Testament, by New Testament authors referencing to this text. It's an important one. You could spend years, you could write doctoral dissertations on the content there and still not plummet to the depths. The same thing is true for the events that go from Sunday to Sunday in the week that we are currently experiencing. That's why we spend so much time on it. And in Christian circles, there's this thing called the Christian calendar that's kind of important, or the liturgical calendar I've talked about in the past, that this is the playoffs, if you want to call it like that. In the same way, you go in American sports, you have the NHL and the MLB seasons, NBA seasons, where you'll have each team will play a game, and they might do a little mini series playing against each other throughout the season, but then at the very end, it's 5 games. It's 7 games that you're going to have to play in sequence against the same opponents. And think about the Olympics, how athletes will train for years, really their whole lives, for just that couple of weeks. And they'll travel to wherever the host nation and city happens to be. And they'll go there, and it's one game after another. It's one of the most exhausting aspects of real playoff, real prime time competition, is that back-to-back nature. When do you put in certain players at what specific times? Because you might want to have a pitcher fresh for game 6 or for game 7, or, this kind of thing. That there's a lot happening. There's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of significance to this specific moment that everything has been building up to. Joe Namath once used to say that his confidence in the Super Bowl, because he was one of the first real kind of boisterous athletes in NFL history, where's your confidence come from to say, I'm guaranteed we're going to win? And his answer to that question was the wind sprints in spring training, right? That his ability to perform doesn't come from what he just did last week in the previous game or earlier in the season, but in fact, actually when he was preparing with the sun beating down on him and there was no CTE regulations. That's when. And so in the same way, like, this is crunch time for Jesus and his disciples and his ministry. You see him go to Jerusalem, retire back from it, go back to the city, and then retire from it. Like, you have this kind of thing because the time is now, but it has to be approached a specific way in order to fulfill everything that has been declared about him. That's what he tells the disciples in the upper room. That's what he tells them just beforehand in order to prepare the meal. It starts off in John chapter 13 saying that he knew the time had come. Earlier in his ministry, you'd have instances where people try to force him to be their king. People trying to, because of the miracles that he performed and because of the teachings that he had taught, they're ready to elevate him. And even when he's speaking to his own mother at the first recorded miracle, wedding of Cana, he says, my time hasn't come yet. Well, this week is all about the fact that that time, we're not waiting anymore. It's go time. And that we emphasize all these things day to day to day throughout Holy Week to remind ourselves that when Jesus fulfilled the work of the law on the cross and in the empty tomb, when he finished that work, a new work began in us. Tells the disciples, it's not for you to know the times and seasons appointed by the Father, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you, and you will be my witnesses. It's always been about that, it's go time. There isn't a future that you are supposed to be preparing for as much as the way that like American economic preparations are, of that you're working a lot so that you can save money and retire and enjoy the last handful of decades in between your doctor's appointments with gray hair. It's not that. Of that, now is the time. Now is the day of salvation. Today is the day of ministry. And that if you are thinking, well, my kids are real small right now, and when they get a little more independence and that they are able to sustain themselves without my direct supervision as much, then I'll be concerned about discipleship. Then I'll be concerned about, whatever. Like, it's not that. And if you are thinking that, listen, you're wrong. You're going to wake up tomorrow afternoon and have missed the whole thing. And you will be full of regret and shame over that. That's what's going to happen. I'm not a prophet. I know that the days are short. They tend to just hammer you, right? Exhausted all of the time. You wake up all of a sudden and it seems like the whole world has passed you by. And technology is no longer familiar, and your kids no longer want to spend time with you, and whatever. Like, and then you'll wonder, what did I waste all of my time on? What did I do? What was the point of the meaningless scrolling I did for so much of my children's childhood? No, today. Take active steps today to prepare yourself so that you can, in the future, be ready. Because otherwise, you're going to find out not only did you waste the time you have today, but you won't be prepared for the things in the future, and you're going to miss that too.